Speak. And
Hey, what is going on, everybody, and welcome to
am
Fantasia. For today, we're going to be jumping into another session of Epic 7 now today. Got some more first impressions for you guys. This time around, we're going to go ahead and take a look at the Lady of the Scales, who's actually just Meru from a different timeline. Now, this is actually really cool. We're seeing Meru inside the Moonlight Theater here, and her kit will make a lot more sense once you watch the Moonlight Theater and get the context of the lore. I love it when the game takes lore and then combines it with the actual in-game units kit, right? It just makes things so much more immersive and so much more fascinating. So anyway, jumping into this here, the Lady of the Scales is going to be part of Briarwitch Iseria's story, and we're going to go ahead and check out her kit. But first of all, we have to take a look at her actual star signs, right? So Lady of the Scales here is going to be a 5-star light elemental soul weaver who has the Taurus star sign. Now, if you're wondering like, oh, well, as a what other units can compare to a Taurus Soul Weaver, we have actually a couple that you might be familiar with. But first of all, going into this here, you're seeing that the Lady of the Scales has really low base health, right? And that's usually not great. However, she actually does have some really good base speed. 117 base speed is decent, it's not terrible, and she has really high effect resistance, right? The other thing here is that she also does have a team imprint for additional effect res, and she self-imprints into more effect resistance as well. So that's really cool to see. Now, when it comes to actual units that you might be familiar with, if we jump on over to Epic 7, the first example here for this channel, you guys know that I love DJB, also known as Desert Jewel Basar. He is also a Taurus Soul Weaver, that's a 5-star unit, and he's very comparable here. If I go ahead and self-imprint him, you can see you can build a Meru with insane amounts of effect resistance, right? It's not that bad. Other units that are Taurus, like if you have a 4-star version of this unit, you can go for something like a Bunny Dom, right, to compare stats. And I believe Frida is another Soul Weaver that is also a Taurus Soul Weaver. Same thing with Ahmed, right? So you can see these units can be built like relatively fast. You know, Ahmed is usually used as an opener. Frida is also used as kind of an opener in some cases like a bridge unit, right? So you can be building her decently fast. DJB is a very good anti-opener unit that most people tend to build relatively fast as well. So you can see that Lady of the Scales does have a way to kind of play with a bit more tempo, and we'll get into that more when we get to her kit too. But yeah, this is a pretty cool stat line to see, especially since DJB just recently got converted to the stat line. But keep in mind, again, bulk on these units are relatively low. It's hard to make a tanky Frida, DJB, or Ahmed, for example, and those of you guys who have tried in the past will know that pain. So anyway, Lady of the Scales is pretty cool here. Let's check out the actual skills. Starting off here with Skill 2, Scales of Equity. At the start of battle, grants offering to the foremost ally. When the ally granted offering dies, recovers health of all allies by 50%. When combat readiness of an enemy increases during battle, increases combat readiness of the caster by up to 50% of the amount of combat readiness increased. This effect will not be applied to the combat readiness increase effect triggered by the same skill. Offering is a unique effect that's a permanent buff, and it's granted to the foremost ally that grants 70% damage sharing from the damage received by all allies. Upon receiving lethal damage, grants immortality for 1 turn. Immortality can only be activated once per battle. So right off the bat, we're already seeing this passive being absolutely disgusting. So if you're not familiar with damage sharing, that is like the artifact Aureus that a lot of knights tend to run, which shares 20% of the damage that's dealt, right? So essentially you're decreasing the amount of damage your allies take, and you're taking on the brunt of that damage, right, for them. This is really dangerous though. Aureus helps knights kind of mitigate some damage, help your units survive, while helping the knight kind of, you know, just soak up the damage. If you're using something like an ice crow, he can then use revenge damage, right? Like a Yolha as well can do revenge damage, or you have a healer or somebody heal up the knight and you're good. 70% damage sharing is a ridiculous amount. If your ally is taking, like, you know, let's say 20k damage, like your opponent is nuking you, and you take like 20k damage, 70% of that is like 14k damage. Like you're basically evaporating alongside of the unit that you're trying to protect, right? So this is a really dangerous skill. Now, I will say there are units that we can pair with her, and we'll talk about that when we talk about team compositions. But yeah, this by itself, 70%, keep in mind, really bad. However, do keep in mind that your unit's not going to die from this. They will get immortality for a turn, and this of course can still be countered by giving like an unbuffable or something like that to your opponent. If you're facing a Meru, right, for example, you can put unbuffable onto your opponent, the foremost ally that has this offering buff, and you can prevent the immortality from proccing. Nowhere here does it cleanse any debuffs, right? So that is something to keep in mind. The other thing is, while she can be built relatively fast, she also just gains combat readiness like crazy too. So if your opponent opens up with stuff that gains combat readiness, she's going to gain 50% of that combat readiness alongside of your opponent. So if your opponent's pushing up 20% combat readiness, she's going to jump up 10% herself, which is really nice. And if it's a non-attack skill or anything, because she's a Soul Weaver, and we'll get into the artifacts later, you can also run artifacts that allow you to boost up your combat readiness that way too. So there's a lot of ways for her to potentially cut your opponent, which is really nice to see. Now we're going to see in this like demonstration here, where the opponent's essentially just nuking with Genoa, right? And you can see that the Crow here ends up taking lethal damage. He would die, he's on 1 health, and he gets granted the immortality. He's been soaking up a ton of damage for the team, while Meru's being pelted by a bunch of damage on the opponent's side, right? So it is pretty cool to see that that combination of skills come in to synergize. Okay, now moving on here, we have the skill 3, I believe. There we go. So skill 3 is an active skill. It's called Caress of Mercy. With the goddess's authority, dispels all debuffs from all allies and increases combat readiness by up to 25%. Consumes 20% of the current health of the ally granted offering, granting abundance to all other allies for 2 turns. So again, this is really cool because we're seeing more unique effects, right? So offering, we already covered earlier. That's the foremost ally taking the brunt of everyone's damage, right? Everybody else on the team, though, including Meru herself here, gets abundance. So abundance is a unique effect that lasts for 2 turns, and after attacking, you inflict 2,000 additional damage to the target. So this is essentially fixed damage, right? It's kind of like how Rinok deals 7,000 fixed damage to everybody on the opponent's side when she uses her S3. This fixed damage is going to be very powerful as well, again, especially because it lasts 2 turns, so it's not just a one and done situation, but also because this just gives 2,000 damage to the target. If you have AoE attacks that you're using, you're going to be able to deal 2,000 fixed damage to like everyone on your opponent's side. Do keep in mind though, again, that you are consuming the HP of the foremost ally. Assuming that they have the immortality up anyway, it doesn't really matter. You can't really finish off your own frontline unit with this unless they're just zooming in combat readiness and then turn cycling out of their immortality, right? So do keep that in mind. Now this is pretty good because if your opponent opens up with stuff, your S2 is allowing you to push up your combat readiness anyway, and with your S3, then if your opponent was like debuffing you, let's say with like Conquer Lilius or other openers that do such stuff, right? Like let's say New Moon Luna or whatever, you can dispel all the debuffs on your side, and you also push up your own combat readiness. So she becomes a unit that cuts your opponent and then pushes up your own team to prevent your opponent from essentially like cleaving you or going super aggro against your team, right? So she's a really good counter pick unit actually, just based on the kit alone. Now in practice, it might be different, so we'll have to see. Keep in mind the skill has a relatively long cooldown as well. That's 4 turns if you get the skill enhancement there for the 3rd skill here, which gives you a -1 turn cooldown. That's relatively long skill cooldowns. So it is going to be a full team cleanse though, so it's very, very strong. So just keep that in mind. Right. Anyway, you see the fixed damage there. It does proc onto units that have evasion, so it's a great way to kind of counter Afternoon Soak Flan and units similar to her. So, moving on, we have skill number 1, which is Divine Punishment, where you attack the enemy with Divine Lightning, and you have a 50% chance to inflict fear for 1 turn before recovering health of all allies proportional to the target's max health. Okay, so when it comes to this skill here, you can actually get up to, I believe that's a 25, you have a 75% chance to inflict fear for a turn, and if you use 10 souls of soul burn, you get to increase the effect chance to 100%, and then you attack all enemies, becomes an AoE, and when you do that, it no longer is able to trigger a dual attack. Now, when you inflict fear, you guys might know that fear is a dreaded debuff from Mort. This is actually not as good as Mort because it's only a 1-turn fear. Mort had the chance to proc 2-turn fear, and you could potentially lose 2 of your turns, right? Now, this doesn't guarantee that your opponent's going to lose their turn like a sleep or a stun. Fear, actually, your opponent has a 40% chance to dispel it at the start of their turn, right? So not only do you have a 75% chance to land this, but then you have a 40% chance to dispel it at the start of their turn. It's not a very reliable debuff, even if you soul burn it to 100% chance, right? And let's say you land it. This doesn't even ignore effect resistance, so you can still get 15%ed. On top of that, the fear, you have a 40% chance for your opponent to just snap out of their fear anyway. So it's a very RNG type of thing. It's honestly like a stun would be so much more reliable, but a stun will at the same time be so much more oppressive and powerful. I can see fear being kind of like it's essentially like an RNG stun, right? So you can use it to crowd control and prevent your opponent from moving, especially certain units from maybe proccing their passives and such, right? Which is kind of cool. But at the same time, again, keep in mind that as an actual debuff itself, it's not as reliable as stun, and I guess it's like a side grade to like a sleep. Sleep is a little weird, where if you hit the opponent that's sleeping, they'll be able to wake up again, and that's not necessarily always great. You can't wake someone or snap someone out of fear, but they can snap out of it themselves, right? I see it sort of as a side grade. But anyway, Lady of the Scales looking to be quite interesting, and yeah, be very excited to try to summon for her, and she'll be available through the Mystic Summons starting August 28, right? So in about a week, I will be planning my 25k subscriber special around that time as well. I'm going to be summoning with all of my saved up Galaxy bookmarks to try to get her once she's released into the summoning pool. I'll try to use my Galaxy summons first. If I can't get her through that, then we will definitely try to summon her with some Mystic Metals and then try to put her to good use. I actually really like her little cape here, and I do love the 2 little imps carrying the scales as well, so it's kind of nice. Alright, so that does it for the overview of Miru's kit. Now we have a lot to talk about in terms of artifacts, and then we will talk about gear sets and potential builds that you can run with a little example that I'm going to build using DJB. And then on top of that, we're going to talk about some team compositions. What teammates can you potentially run with her? Alright guys, when it comes to artifacts, a couple of them come to mind immediately. The first one, I think the most popular one that's going to be on her, is going to be something called Soul Constellation. It's a summer artifact, it's a limited artifact, but you can still get it with the ongoing banners right now. It increases your effect resistance by 30% at plus 15, and whenever your opponent uses a non-attack skill, you jump up by 12% combat readiness. Seems very minor, but keep in mind she's already gaining a lot of combat readiness if your opponent's already pushing up their team too, right? Conqueror Lilius is S3, ML Peyra's S3. You have so many units that just push up combat readiness, right? It's kind of nice. But even when your opponent doesn't push up combat readiness, let's say they use ML Politis to push your combat readiness back, or they use those types of things, right? Their non-attack skills, or even, let's say, a New Moon Luna, right? Going for a non-attack skill, trying to seal everybody, put unbuffable on. Then you'll gain the combat readiness here, and then you'll be able to go, cut your opponent, S3, full cleanse your team, and then push up your team by 25% combat readiness. It's pretty good. If you don't have Soul Constellation or all of them are taken, you don't really want to put them on her, then another option could be Eternus. Eternus is very similar, but instead of your opponent using a non-attack skill as a condition to gain the combat readiness, here you can gain 14% combat readiness if your ally has a debuff at the end of an enemy's turn. So if your opponent's using Conqueror Lilius or New Moon Luna, right, those types of units that debuff you with a non-attack skill, or any, it could be an attack skill too, but very rarely do you see units that attack and debuff with openers. Maybe like an ML Peyra if she S1s and accidentally defense broke somebody, but that's relying too much on RNG. Anyway, Eternus is kind of okay for that. It's very similar to Soul Constellation, just I don't think the activation conditions are as good, but it's a slight downgrade. It's still decent. right? And then when it comes to, like, if you want to heal your team, her S1's pretty decent. If you're running a counter build or something, you might be going for Celestine for some extra healing. I can definitely see people also going for, where is it? The Guardian Ice Crystals, right? Where you get some effect resistance, and whenever you're hit when you guys are on low health, you'll recover 15% of the target ally's HP, which is pretty decent as well. Now, when it comes to little text that you could potentially use if you're running her on counter or something, Sacred Tree Branch is also not bad. You get the extra effectiveness, which is wonderful for applying your Fear debuff on the S1, and on top of that, you'll gain combat readiness for herself and the ally with the highest attack. So you can turn cycle them, take turns, right? It's pretty nice stuff, especially because you're mitigating damage already for the whole team. Hopefully your DPSs have an easier time surviving. Other things I could potentially see being decent are... this really depends on like the situation. If you see her like getting focused down a whole ton, Touch of Rekos, right? If your opponent has a lot of AoEs, you can heal everybody here this way. When it comes to generic artifacts, you can also be running Bastion of Hope for more effect resistance, and potentially even like Proof of Valor if you feel like she's really getting focused down too much. The damage sharing, 70% damage share is insane, so I don't think this will ever be an issue where she's taking too much damage, but in the case that you need it, their options exist. So let's go ahead and continue on, but this time with what sets should you be running on this Lady of the Scales? Well, when we come to the sets here, a no-brainer is definitely going to be Speed Set, right? Speed Set is absolutely amazing, 25% speed, it's really nice. You can build her nice and fast, it's a stat that she scales pretty well off of. 117 base speed is not bad at all, so this is pretty decent. Now, other 4-piece sets that you could potentially think about are counter set, right? I mentioned this earlier. You can maybe run her on like a counter build, trying to inflict fear and such onto your opponent. It's not terrible, but again, it's not overly reliable either, so do keep that in mind. I don't think I'd recommend other 4-piece sets here necessarily, like Protection Set usually make you a little bit too slow, and her max HP is really low, so you wouldn't really benefit off of the barrier there anyway. But when it comes to 2-piece sets, even though her base HP is pretty low, you can maybe get away with using an HP set if you really want to. I'd say a better set to use is probably a Resist set if you're trying to build up some effect resistance. She's a Soul Weaver after all. You don't want your opponent to be able to push her back, provoke her, silence her, all that stuff before she can take her first turn to full cleanse your team. So effect resistance is pretty nice. When it comes to effectiveness, you don't really need any effectiveness to debuff regular DPS units. So if you're going after a, let's say, a DPS Genoa, any other DPS unit on your opponent's side, like let's say a Spirit Eye Celine, right? If they're not built with effect resistance, you don't need effectiveness to fear them, which is pretty good. But effect res is pretty nice if you're trying to go the effect res route. On the other hand, though, if you really do want to really lean into that effectiveness route, like some people did with AROM, hit set could be pretty decent for raising your effectiveness. And yeah, if you're not building effect resistance, maybe going for an immunity set could be alright. Again, not the best option overall, but maybe you can 15% your opponent at some point. I think going for resistance is probably a bit more consistent here, but that is an option if you so desire. So here is an example of what you can do with Lady of the Scales if you really wanted to lean in towards both the effectiveness and the effect resistance portion of her kit. Keep in mind that if you're running something like Soul Consolation, you are going to be able to get like 30% extra effect resistance here, so you're going to be sitting comfortably at what, like 215 effect resistance, right, which is not bad. Even with something like Guardian Ice Crystals, will bring you up to like about 200 effect res, so with 250 speed, with the extra combat readiness you're gaining, like the 12% from the Soul Consolation, and plus the extra combat readiness you can potentially gain with her passive, this makes her like a pretty decent build here if you're going for like a mixed version, right? You might be looking at the bulk going like, whoa, the defense is low and the HP is not great, but keep in mind that the base HP of this unit is really low, but on the other hand, you also have to keep in mind that the frontline unit's going to be taking 70% of whatever damage you're taking, so if Lady of the Scales is eating a bunch of damage, she's really not. It takes 70% of that extra damage, right? If your opponent's inflicting an extra 2,000 damage on you, it's really an extra 600 because 1,400 of that is being mitigated by the frontline unit. So it's pretty decent, okay? The speed, though, could use a little bit of improvement. This was just me trying to balance out the effectiveness and the effect resistance. But if you wanted to go for something like pure speed and effect res, the original DJB build I have on the left side is probably a really good comparison. You could honestly just slow it down just a teeny tiny bit and then build some more bulk on her, and she could be pretty nice there as well. So let's go ahead and take a look at another example here. What if you decided to go for a counter build, right? Again, keeping in mind that you have 70% damage sharing on your team, and you can potentially be running other artifacts and such on your units that give you barriers, right? You could be running protection sets on other units and such. Just depending on team composition, you could be running a decent amount of speed. You don't need to invest too much in bulk, and you can run something like this. I have a counter set and a resist set going on at 260 speed at 200 effect resistance. Now, yes, this is not a very cheap thing to build. I have like a 21 speed helmet. I try not to use like DJB's stuff here, if possible, but you know, set at 18 speed here. We do have like a 23 speed necklace here, but it's, again, flat HP. You're gonna notice that when it goes to flat HP, if I'm comparing it to, let's say, an HP percent piece like this, look, the flat HP piece, I know it has 8% HP here, but it's very comparable. Like, it's not that bad, right? Even without the 8% here, a flat HP necklace actually does wonders. So this is just to show you that flat HP works. Even if you don't have the 23 speed here, it's fine. Like, you can have a little bit lower speed. This is just, again, an example of what you could potentially be running if you really want to invest heavily into her. I got a 20 speed ring here that just was really lucky and got that. And again, you can have a lot of these like free pieces that you see laying around, especially for the speed build that I showed earlier. All those weird pieces that have like both effectiveness and effect res on them, she's a unit that can potentially use those types of pieces that are laying around. But anyway, this is a pretty decent build here. I would say mod out the defense percent, or sorry, flat defense here for HP percent, and you're looking pretty solid. You can also mod out the effectiveness if you really wanted to. Coming in here, I can mod out this effectiveness and give either defense percent, or I can go for more effect resistance, bringing the cap way over the 200 here. So if I modded this for effect resistance here, got like, let's say 14%, and I would get like 214% here, plus Soul Constellation, which gives 30%. You're sitting at like 244% effect resistance, basically 250 effect res, right? And that is very solid for a counter build at 260 speed. Again, the fact that you can, you know, forego some of your bulk to invest in those stats is really nice. If you really wanted more bulk, you can easily go for some HP. You can even go for like flat HP, which I don't have laying around, but you can go for HP stats here. Let's say you want to go for something like this, right? Definitely more bulky, but you are losing a lot of effect resistance. Keep in mind that going for something like a counter build is definitely more risky. Sorry, we need to get a proper, there we go, proper resist set going here. It is a bit more risky because you are foregoing a lot of free stats. Counter set does not innately give you anything besides a chance to counterattack. And you might be wondering, like, but Azza, like, if you're using a counter set, don't you want effectiveness? You could, but keep in mind, on a counter set, you're expecting to be attacked a lot. I'd probably go for the effect resistance and just allow yourself to fear, like, the lower effect res units on your opponent's side, right? But that's just my train of thought here. But yeah, anyway, that is the two builds that I think I can showcase pretty nicely. Those are two options that you can go for. I'll try to show you guys what I mean for the speed calculations as well. So let's go ahead and quickly dive into that before moving on. So you know the school year starting when the math teacher breaks out the calculators, but let's go ahead and do a few calculations just to show you what I mean by having enough speed, right? 260 something speed is about where you want to sit if you're just relying on Soul Constellation's boost and not Meru's passive. So let's assume that your opponent's opening up with a 300 speed unit that's going to be inflicting some sort of or using some sort of a non-attack skill to open. Let's say like an ML Peyra, for example, right? Let's say I have that 300 speed New Moon Luna. Let's go with this. Now, if you're going for a 300 speed unit here, and Soul Constellation gives you 12% combat readiness, so you are going to be at 88% combat readiness. In order to cut, you need 12% to get 100. So we're going to multiply 300 by 0.88, 88%, and that means that you would need 264 speed in order to cut your opponent if you just relied on Soul Constellation's combat readiness boost. Now, you can dramatically decrease this depending on what units you're like kind of counter-picking her into. You don't have to use her as like a generic anti-opener unit, but you can definitely use her into more specific things, right? So now let's think of a scenario where your opponent's going to be using some combat readiness increase effects on their team. Well, if you are going up against, let's say, a Lone Wolf Pyrrha on the opponent's side, she gives the team 10% combat readiness every time she takes a turn. So let's say she opens up with an S3 into an S1, right? She takes 2 turns, and she pushes up the team 20% combat readiness. Meru will then push up herself 10%. She takes 50% of the opponent's gain, and she gets that. So you're going to be gaining 10% combat readiness plus your 12% from the Soul Constellation because your opponent used a non-attack skill, right, with Pyrrha's S3. And that means you get 22% combat readiness gains, which is really nice. Keeping that in mind, if your opponent's at 100% combat readiness and you want to cut them, you're 22% combat readiness less than them, you're at 78% combat readiness, which means, to do the calculation, assuming your opponent's 300 speed Pyrrha, you multiply that by 0.78. Okay, because 78% is what you need to have as your starting amount to cut your opponent. So now this dramatically decreases the speed that you need on the Lady of the Scales. 234 speed is the minimum you need in order to cut your opponent, because you'll be gaining 22% combat readiness, which is really nice. But again, you really don't want to be banking on your opponent using a non-attack skill like that boosts up their combat readiness. Think of other popular opens. New Moon Luna does not gain combat readiness for the team. ML Politis doesn't gain combat readiness for the team, right? Such and so on and so forth. But do keep in mind, it's not just openers, it's other bridge units. So for example, Sage Ball and Cezanne, when he gains combat readiness, you can push up. When Afternoon Soak Flan pushes herself up, you can push up. When Sunbreak Charlotte attacks you, right, with a dual attack, and she pushes up her team, you will also push up. So when you're looking at bridge units like that, it's going to be really, really nice to gain all that combat readiness that your opponent's getting. So if your opponent opens a Zeo, no problem, but if they have a Silverblade Araminta there, and then she's going to be gaining combat readiness, you can gain combat readiness alongside of her, which is really cool. And on the same note, like if your opponent has a Wrecker and Rowana, that's gaining combat readiness because your opponent has an opener at the front line that takes the first turn, you're also gaining half of that combat readiness, right? So it's really cool to be able to manipulate your opponent's combat readiness to help yourself. In those cases, I mean, you're probably going to die to Silverblade Araminta, is just an example. But that aside, yeah, the speed calculations, I encourage you to run them for yourself to see based on what scenarios you're going to be bringing her into, if she's going to be viable at certain speeds or not. And last but not least, let's go ahead and talk about potential teammates. For some reason, in the YouTube comments of the Lady of the Scales video, I've been seeing a lot of people mentioning Boss of Runka, for example. And on Reddit too, I was hearing a lot of conversation, reading a lot of conversation about using Boss of Runka as the frontline tank. I think that's a pretty awful idea, because Boss of Runka will then be soaking up 70% of your opponent, of all the damage that's coming into your team, which means she's gonna fall really quickly. There's a reason why no one puts Boss of Runka on Aureus. When she takes too much damage and falls, you're essentially just vulnerable, right? You bring Boss of Runka so they have to attack Boss of Runka. The other thing is, whenever she's hit, she gains combat readiness, so when they hit her and she has immortality with 1 HP left, they can just hit her and then turn cycle her out of her immortality, and then just finish her off with pretty much almost any unit that's there. So it's really dangerous to have Boss of Runka being the frontline unit. Now, keeping in mind the lore with Briarwitch Iceria, you'll start to see that, wait a minute, the frontline unit who can take the most amount of damage without falling is a unit with immortality in their passive, right? Briarwitch Iceria has immortality. She's obviously not the best unit to be bringing with her for Lady of the Scales, unless your opponent's like spamming revive units, but with immortality in mind, we can then look at BBK. Like, that's the first unit that comes to mind, right? BBK also deals more damage the lower the HP she has. So she starts with immortality. Upon receiving lethal damage, she will gain immortality with her EE, right? And the less damage, so the less health she has, the more damage she will deal, which is really good. And so it's just perfect synergy here. Now, do keep in mind that when you get the immortality at the start of the match, when you proc immortality, let's say you have a really slow BBK like I do, base speed, and your opponent's just continuously attacking your team, you will, once you reach that 1 HP threshold, it won't trigger like Lady of the Scales' like immortality that she would give with the buff. Assuming this works like with Abigail, you essentially have 3 rounds of immortality with BBK. The one that she starts with at the beginning of the match, the second one that she'll get from either her EE or Lady of the Scales, whichever one procs first. I don't know which one will, but let's assume that's her EE that procs first. Right, then when this immortality wears off, then she'll get the one from Lady of the Scales effect, right, the sacrifice effect. So yeah, you can have a 3-turn immortality BBK, and it's absolutely disgusting, right? Other units that can potentially work are, like, again, I just have to mention them. Amiki, for example, also has immortality. Could be a unit that you want to use, but Amiki is a kind of a different case because you want your opponent to attack into her and not necessarily just get her down low in terms of HP. Same thing with Genoa. You might think, oh, but Genoa immortality, he needs to be hit in order for you to proc his passive, so it's not just he falls below 50% health, he'll proc his passive. No, it is a little bit dangerous here with Genoa. If they do have AoEs, he might not be a bad option, honestly, to bring along. But yeah, keep in mind that the best user of immortality in this case, in this context, is going to be BBK. Now, you can obviously run knights that soak up a ton of damage and have revenge damage. They showed Crow in the showcase here. So you can run a lower speed Crow, potentially, that like 30, almost 40k HP on Crow, and you can use his S3 to penetrate defense, because the more damage that he has taken, the more damage he will deal, right? Damage dealt increases proportional to the caster's lost health. So you want Crow to take a bunch of damage. He's soaking up 70% for the team. Really great tank, also really good supportive unit. So, for example, Lady of the Scales, if she's in the back line, you can give her a chunky barrier, right? So even if you're lower HP and stuff, you're still going to be pretty resilient against your opponent. And Crow himself is also pretty resilient. You can also run Holy Sacrifice on him too. He will lose that buff that allows him to damage share, but then his passive will kick in, right? Or sorry, his skill here will kick in, where he grants 25% damage share, as long as his S3 is not on cooldown. So that is something you can do. You can have Holy Sacrifice Crow. He takes a bunch of damage, soaks everything up for your team, tanks everything for everybody, revives with Holy Sacrifice, your opponent's already out of gas, and then you nuke your opponent with Crow. Could be kind of cool with like a Holy Sacrifice. Again, keep in mind that his you can put Crow on the new set that allows your team to revive. The set that gives your team 50% combat readiness when the unit revives. So Crow can be finished off, have Holy Sacrifice, come back, push up by 50% combat readiness, and then take the turn. So that's pretty nice. A similar case would be something like a Yolha. So my Yolha's down here. Here we go. Yolha you can also run on a similar type of situation where you can run Holy Sac on her. You don't have to run Aureus if you're planning on using her just with your Lady of the Scales, by the way. But yeah, Yolha's very similar to Crow. You can build a bunch of HP on her. I don't think this is an optimal build by any means, but you can put a bunch of HP on her here and then have her tank, just like Crow would. And yeah, I would say that it's probably not great to have the damage share be a unit that would easily turn cycle out of their immortality. You want units that don't necessarily push up when they take the damage. So in that sense, I probably wouldn't recommend something like a Dragon Bride Senya. Like in the front line, she doesn't benefit from being on low HP, right? So you would just essentially, your opponent be easily whittling down your Dragon Bride Senya, and then she won't be able to protect the backline unit anymore. So be very careful with the knights that you use. Now another example, I'm just going to toss it out there because I can. Last Rider Crow. I have mine built on the Lifesteal set, so he'll be soaking up a ton of damage, but he also grants barriers when you're hit by AoEs, and you will be able to get the immortality, prevent yourself from dying immediately, of course, but the main thing with Last Rider Crow on Lifesteal set is you're going to be healing a bunch of damage that's dealt, right? And so you'll be able to heal yourself up, and yeah, absorb 20% of the damage dealt. when you're doing your AoE S3, that's penetrating defense, doing all that stuff, you'll be able to gain back some of that HP and hopefully stay alive long enough for your team to gather the advantage again. The main thing with this is that the immortality is going to save you, so no matter what, you're going to take that first turn. It's just Bossarunka's not a great example because Bossarunka, you're really only picking her to protect everyone in the backline. You don't want her to fall that fast. So I don't agree with the comments in the YouTube section or on Reddit, but then again, when do you ever agree with comments in the YouTube sections? Besides your comments, of course, your comments matter a lot, but you guys know what I mean. Have you seen those preview videos? Have you seen the comments on those? Anyway, moving on here. I don't think there are many units that can withstand that much damage sharing potential, but if you guys have any additional combos and ideas you have, please leave them in the comments down below while we try to figure this out in the next week or so before she gets officially released. But yeah, with that being said, I think like damage sharing can also lead to pretty fun shenanigans with stuff like maybe, I don't know, Arbiter Vildred, right? He was the last unit I wanted to mention here because if you have an Arbiter Vildred that just has on triple torrent set, you know how people use triple torrent set stuff to Arbiter Vildred to counter your opponent's Rinnock, right? Rinnock S3s, nukes everybody, RB dies, comes back, greater attack buff S3s. Well now, yeah, even if your opponent isn't attacking Arbiter Vildred, he'll take 70% of the damage share, fall, come back, greater attack buff, and then nuke everybody. So that's kind of cool. So something for you to think about as your takeaway for this video. But yeah, let me know what you guys think of Lady of the Scales. Do you think she is gonna be good? Do you think she's gonna be underwhelming? What units would you pair with her? That's the main thing I want to ask because I want some ideas. I want to do some really fun testing next week. But anyway, with that being said though guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.